Ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon from wherever you are in the world. As Albert said, I'm Salma Habashi, and I am currently a gamification doctoral researcher in IQA School of Management in Barcelona. So in today's topic, I will be more academia focused, and I will take you through the secret recipe of what should be considered in order to deliver a successful gameful experience that will, from one side, impact your customer's journey when interacting with the gamified app or the platform, and from the other side, make you not miss out what's going on in the world. So as the title says it out and loud, if you're not thinking about it, then you're missing out. First, let's start with a little background of what the literature says. I'm pretty sure I don't need to define what's gamification or any of those terms on your screens for this audience, but just this, for the sake of reminding all of us, the research of gamification, which is the use of game techniques in non-game contexts, has been mainly focused on investigating and analyzing this topic from a mechanics level, a dynamics one, or an aesthetics one. So you can clearly notice that this stands for the MDA framework that was developed by Leblanc et al. And it was also inspired from video games frameworks. This MDA was developed for the purpose of designing the gamified app or platform in terms of, first of all, we have the rules of the game. So this also stands for the mechanics. These are the constraints under which the game operates. How is the game set up? What actions can players take? What effects do those actions have on the game stage? When does the game end? How is a resolution determined? So all of these questions, when you have answers to them, you are defining the mechanics of your game. Once we have these mechanics and rules set in motion, we move to describing the play of the game, and that is what dynamics stands for. So over here, we are talking about, for example, the strategies that emerge from the rules. How do the players interact with one another, to name only a few. In a later stage, we find the aesthetics part of the MDA framework. And using this MDA sense, it does not refer to the visual elements of the game like we are used to, but rather the player experience of the game, the effect that the dynamics have on the players themselves. Is the game fun? Is the play frustrating? Is it boring? Is it interesting? Is it emotionally and intellectually engaging? So throughout all of these questions, we are building little by little our gamified system. And looking at this framework, designing a game or a gamified system looks feasible to some, piece of cake to others probably. But then incorporating the successful gamification framework has been a topic for too long. Many designers struggled back then and are still struggling up to now because of the lack of the vocabulary to build effective games-like systems. And for this, I will quote Greg Kostikian in his essay, "I have no words and I must design towards a critical vocabulary for games designers." Greg said, "It is important to understand how and why game structures do shape player behavior. Therefore, it is crucial to understand that the actions as designers, the actions that the designers are taking in a way or another, how they will help build these good gaming experiences. In gamification, we are trying to make the people learn, to engage, to change behaviors, even shape new behaviors. So do we know how to do that? Are we considering all of those elements, or are we just looking at it from an extrinsic point of view? Sometimes people find themselves demotivated to pursue a set of activities, but simply adding game elements does not imply the enjoyment of the activity." So let's try to put this into context. And just moving over here. Oh, I can see, Albert, that the animation is not working, so it's fine. Let me just go one slide back. So let's try to put this into context, and let's think about physical activity as the context of our talk today. Do you think that exercising or working out is enjoyable? Do you all work out on a regular basis? I mean, feel free to use the chat if you are on YouTube or on Facebook to answer my question, and let's give it a minute. So Albert, do you see any answers over there? Oh, look at that, Pete. He enjoys the workout. Semi-regularly, I try to do exercise. Well, that's good. I mean, it seems like we have a fit audience, but then you will be surprised to know that in a typical week, just over one quarter, around 27% of the European population exercises for up to 3 hours. The main reason may be that this activity is not perceived as the most enjoyable one to do, and the idea for resolving this will clearly be gamification. Many brands, aware of that, made their own gamified apps for exercising, working out, running. Again, I am curious to know if our audience uses any apps for working out or running. Again, you can use the chat to answer that. So we have daily. Let's give it a minute. I just see answers coming in. No, not running, only walking. Well, perfect. So it's not as simple as it seems. Like I said, adding game-like elements does not imply ensuring an enjoyable experience. Actually, it is only like a tiny bit or a tiny part representing the extrinsic aspects. And what needs to be considered is way beyond giving a badge to someone, a point to another, or putting people on leaderboards. Yeah. So it should be covering also the intrinsic motivations that were outlined in the self-determination theory by Deci and Ryan. This is the motivation that drives us to become better, that pushes us to change our behaviors and stick to a habit, for example. We have three dimensions or expressions of needs for that. We have the need for autonomy, the need for competence, the need for relatedness. Now, what is autonomy? So when we talk about autonomy, it's important to think about the user's attitude towards accepting the game system rules, and also about the feeling that they still have that independency. I mean, we are still in the gaming world, so full independency is just an illusion that designers are creating to make people think that they have that sense of ownership to keep them motivated, because we all know that there will always be limitations within that word. But the feeling that the user actually has a choice, or that choice is endorsing his behavior, is what matters. The second factor that we have is the competence. So the feeling that the skills the person have are matching with the environment is what will be pushing that person to be using that gamified app more and more, to be having that experience with the application or the system. So, and the other part of it is that he needs to see, or she needs to see, that their skills are becoming better. They are becoming more shaped within time, so that you will keep that interest going. The last factor, that is relatedness. So again, a very important point for feeling self-motivated is the relatedness that I feel for other people in the game world. It's that need for feeling connected, for belonging to others. And this is actually not a new concept, because when we think about it, many years before digitalization, when we used to play games, we had these board games. It was in general multiplayer games. So you had this need of having these social interactions with people in order to make the game better, more social, more successful. So the self-determination theory is at the heart of building these intrinsically motivating gameful experiences. Now, I've used this concept of gameful experience quite a lot, and I think it is about time to define where is it. Let's move to the next slide. So when we talk about the gameful experience, or is it known today, it refers to these positive, emotional, and involving qualities that we are having and using in the gamified system. Again, and going back to the vocabulary point that I talked about in the start of this talk, it has been considered before under different terminologies, or even as a part of the gamification concept overall. So it has been defined as the final result that the gamification is aiming to be achieving. The gameful experience occurs when a person interacts with a system, providing first non-trivial but achievable goals. So those goals, it's really important to be having goals that are achievable, because if they are just so challenging, or if they're not achievable, then the person just loses the interest. Those goals, they need to be aiming towards channeling a certain type of behaviors. It can be to learn a new skill. It can be to get more fit, for example. While the person is actually wanting to do that, it should be voluntary for it to be a gainful experience. If it's not voluntary, it's still an experience, just not gainful. So the question now would be, what is the secret recipe of creating this successful gainful experience? And for that, we have the following slide. So it's really about different strategies to create these experiences. Those strategies were brought down to 5, adopted from PhD Leonard's keynote presentation about the 5 gamification languages to help us understand what's going on around us, like in gameful design. So what do we have? We have goals and challenges. We have quality of content and context. We have incentives, voluntary interactions, and game mechanics. We're gonna be looking at every step of like this, well, every dimension of these 5 gamification languages to understand how we can be building this successful gameful experience in order to be delivering like the full gamified system to our customers, and then to just keep that engagement going in the future. So let's start with the goals and challenges. So starting with goals and challenges, when we are building a gamified system, we need to set a goal that needs to be affirmed and accepted by the user. Let's say that the goal for our context, since it's physical activity, is to lose X weight. Once the person relates to that, they will start interacting with the system by following the different challenges that are set over there to guide him or her throughout this journey. So within the system, we're not just gonna put lose weight and that's it. We will be defining actually some very specific tasks that usually a person wouldn't really do by themselves. An example would be every day you need to eat less than this number of calories, or you need to do this number of exercises, or you need to walk like this number of kilometers. So in this strategy, what the designer would do is to reframe this difficult challenge in a gameful way by, for example, offering the person a personalized avatar. So you can see on the slide, you have like the avatar that the person will get in the start of the interaction with this like gamified application or platform. And then if the person wants to gain more muscles, then depending on the goals and the missions that the person will be achieving every day, this avatar will also be shaping. So this way we are offering a representation to that person, but not in a way that he's feeling that he's targeted, like directly in a way where he is enjoying what he's seeing on the application. So it's really about breaking it down and putting it into these very unique situations that will spark the person's imagination or help him feel enjoyment. So instead of looking at themselves, they get distracted by the environment, by the avatar, for instance, while achieving their goals. This is one way of approaching the creation of the gameful experience. The second point that we will be having is the quality of context and the content. So when we are talking about designing a gameful experience, these two aspects are very important. We need to know how we are guiding this experience towards our players. So let's again say in the context of the fitness applications, we want to situate the actions related to our goals and to put them into context. So for example, if we say that the person needs to do X amount of exercises, that can be, for example, mountain climbers exercises within the app, the design needs to add a personalization to this goal. For example, you can do these mountain climbers after this other exercise, or at night, or in the morning. It needs to be situated in a context that the person can relate to. I hope that is clear. Then again, you can use a combination of the two previous strategies or every one of these strategies by itself. The third one that we have is the incentives. So this is another language that actually is kind of the most spoken language by designers, especially in the start. So when I talk about incentives, I talk about the rewards, about the gifts that like the person will be getting when interaction with the gamified system. This for sure will motivate the user. But the incentive needs to make more sense to the person. It needs to relate to what the person wants to achieve. It should be after a mission that it's accomplished to trigger that feeling of recognition, for instance. Because if you just give this like incentives from the start without any efforts, then the person just loses the interest. And most importantly, it needs to also be aligned and relate to the content and context. So in our case, one of the incentives, for example, can be to get this amount of points if you are eating 500 calories a day. But then, since we are still in the fitness context, a person can eat a burger and that would count for 500 calories, but then it just wouldn't make sense because it's not aligned with the context, with what we want to achieve, which is losing weight. So the designers, they need to take this into consideration. The incentives, they also should be focused on the intrinsic goals. So in our case, it was to lose weight. Tracking that goal is very crucial because when the person sees that there is like progress, that there is something happening over there, then they just feel more motivated in order to make more exercises and to use that application on a regular basis. Rewards should also be surprising and random to keep this level of excitement high and going. The fourth, so I just see a question here. Any ideas on empowering the Wu in gameful experience, especially for exercise subjects? Seems like a good fit. Hi, Alireza. So thank you very much for your question. I'm not sure what do you mean by the Wu way. Can you please elaborate more on that? And while waiting for your comment to come in, I will just move to the other point. And that is the voluntary interactions. So the fourth one is voluntary interaction. This is the mindset that the designers sometimes forget about when building the gamified system. First, we need to decide on what we want our user to learn or to achieve at the end of this experience. And starting from there, we set the rules to be followed. But beware of not making them complicated, because if that is the case, then the engagement will be cut short. The outcome of the interaction should also be motivating for the user, and overall, the interaction should feel voluntary. So remember in the start of the talk, I said that in general, when we are within gamified environment, all interactions, they are controlled. You do not have a limited like ownership on everything, but still you need to give the user the illusion that they do have that sense of ownership, that they are free in order like in all the decisions and actions that they are taking. So giving the person the freedom to choose whether they want to engage with this gamified route or this other one is what goes under this voluntary interaction. So, Alireza, I see that you answered. Wu is the art of effortless action in contrary to flow, which is mostly based on cognitive engagement. So let's just say, in different space, especially for exercises subjects. This is exactly what I was like talking about right now when it comes to this voluntary like interactions. So I mean, when we are talking about the flow, we are talking about guiding like all of the interactions with the application using the flow theory. But then as I'm not familiar with this way, I don't want to say something that is not right. So I'm just gonna take a note of it, I'm gonna research it, and I will get back to you. So going back, the last option, and that is the most well-known one, is the game mechanics. It helps to understand how to put something on the way of the user, but also of the system. So reframing the interactions that the user does in the real world into the gamified one really help. If we relate back to our fitness goal, it will be the mechanics will actually be all of the actions that the person needs to take in order to meet that goal, but also the possibility of reframing those actions or rescheduling them will help to keep that. So for example, if I see within my gamified application that today I need to work out, but I don't have time, I should be able to reschedule that workout to the next day and get like a free day. Because if that is not the case, then I feel that I'm missing out on something, and that it's not a feeling that I want to be having when interacting with an app. It will also be considering all of the types of game elements that will be enabling that. So now that we know about these 5 languages, strategies, tools, you can call them whatever you feel like calling them, how can we use them? First, we need to understand the different aspects of every strategy. to experiment with it, and then later to choose whether it makes more sense to combine the 5 of them or to maybe only select one or like the other. Even after building this system, we can still switch from one another. So my recommendation for all the practitioners who are out there seeking a successful gameful experience, you need to understand your user, you need to understand the environment, the context, to set all of those like first to set the base, and then based on that you can just build using all of those strategies or choosing like which strategy would make more sense, again based on the needs and the wants of your user. So now that we learned about the gameful experience, you're very welcome, Ali Reza. The next question that would make more sense is how do we evaluate this gameful experience? So the answer is the following. Actually, within the literature, within the academia, there were different scales that were used to measure the gameful experience. So we had scales that are developed in order like to enable brands, companies, even the academia itself to measure the success of gameful experience. But each one of them has its own limitations. So you need to be aware of, like, for example, the IQ, the JQ, the GXPQ. So all of those, they stand for Immersion Questionnaire, Game Engagement Questionnaire, Game Experience Questionnaire, the latest one that was the Gameful Experience Scale or the questionnaire. Some of them, they were either focusing on violent games. So this limits its use in the gamified apps. Some of the others, they are having like constructs that are neglecting the positive emotional quality that is actually very crucial in order to build a successful gameful experience. But again, this is a topic for another time. You just need to be knowing what you want to be measuring out of those like scales. So if you are, for example, interested in learning more about if your customers are enjoying your apps, they are feeling immersed, absorbed when they are using that, so maybe the Gamex scale would be the one for you. But again, as I mentioned, you need to also be aware of all the limitations that are out there, so that you know when you are measuring this, then maybe it is lacking this other aspect, and you can just compensate using other scales from the literature. So moving on, and to just conclude, with liaising the psychological constructs with the game design element, the outcome would be an impact on customers' behaviors. This will for sure be leading to different, let's say, customer behaviors that can be, for example, the increase of brand loyalty, the word of mouth, the repurchasing behaviors. So it is very important to set those final indicators, those final outcomes in the start, because when you want to build your system, you don't want to build a system and you don't know what is the final outcome or KPI for you as a practitioner, as a brand. So if I'm interested in making people aware of my brand, then I know that this is my final purpose, objective, and I will just build the full gameful experience based on that. So I will use the game elements that are triggering that. I will use the psychological constructs that are like enabling the word, like the way or like channeling that. So again, it's very important to set those outcomes first and then to build the system on top of it. With this, I will be finishing my talk today. So thank you for the time that you took to attend and to interact with me. And now we have the question and answer session that is open.
Thank you very much, Salma. It was a very interesting talk. Hopefully some people slowly put some questions in through. There's a slight delay between obviously the stream and what we see, so it'll come through. But as we're waiting, I'll kick off some thoughts, questions I'd sort of come across. So I love the whole sort of psychological thing. I'm very sort of into, getting the motivational drivers and levers and working through that. And I like the sort of idea that you sort of say, have that sort of holistic approach, making sure that you have the right outcomes and then making sure each individual step along the way sort of comes through it. I want to sort of bring back to one of the first points you had with obviously it needs to be voluntary.
Yes.
You sort of said it must be voluntary to be a gameful experience. If it isn't voluntary, it's just an experience.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of wanted to see what kind of experience is it then if we're sort of forcing the person into it? What is that then? So if you,
Yes, it can be playful experience. So there is like, playful is not gameful. So playful, you are still like, interaction with game elements, for instance, but then it's more like a video game because within video games, you are kind of forced to follow a certain flow and you don't feel that you really have the option, the freedom of choosing. And
mm,
that's why it's really important to be making like, a difference between these two concepts because within, I don't know for the academia, but outside of the academia, a lot of people, they use them like instead, like one instead of the other one. So they are kind of intertwined and that it's
mm,
wrong because then there is a huge difference between the playful experience and the gameful one. And
mhm,
it lays mainly in this like voluntary slash freedom slash
yeah,
choices that the person is having within the application. So that's like very important because
yeah,
again, for the gameful experience, it's all about the emotional connection that you feel when interaction with the gamified system. And if you feel that you are forced, then there like we still have that emotional connection, but it's a bad one.
yeah,
So and this will just lead to like failed gamification, and that's what
yeah.
we want to avoid. Yes.
Yeah. So what I've sort of asked in one of the previous talks with Carl, so that railroading feeling where you're not being guided comfortably, you're just being told what to do, when and where, and just go along with that. And so I think it sort of leads into the next point I had was where you're sort of reframing the challenges and sort of breaking them down into smaller milestones, and then so the usual sort of give them an avatar that becomes a very personalized thing. I also wanted to ask your thoughts in terms of like with sort of adding the sort of gameful experience and bringing that into it. What is your thoughts on altering the terminology and the language to make it more gameful, as it were? Does that help with the emotional connection as well, in your opinion?
Yes, I personally think it does because then again, like as I said, for the vocabulary within the gamified like word in general, we have a lot of terminology, but we are also still missing a lot of words. Especially for designers, they find it really hard when they are like there. They need to design, but then they don't know what's the word they're gonna be putting on that design.
Mm,
So I think that maybe it will be interesting to also A/B test. Let's say if it's like a first time gamified application, so you use this word or the other and you see what sparks the interest of the user more. Then
mm,
you just like, you keep this A/B testing throughout all of like the beta like application version. And then at the end, you make the final decisions on what should go there.
yeah, yep, cool. Looks like we've got some questions in. I'll go jump to the first one, bring it on screen, from Julia. If you know that your target audience doesn't like games, what game elements to use to motivate them?
That's a very interesting question. So, in general, when we talk about not liking games, I personally think that everyone likes games. It's just about how you are framing it. So, let's take, for example, the work world. So, in the work world, we have the senior managers. Maybe they were like born before digitalization, and they're just not comfortable with the idea of gamifying the systems that they've been working with throughout all of these years. So what I would recommend is that, for example, you have a leaderboard. It's not something that like you're gonna be gamifying with avatars or badges or making it look more like childish, let's say. It's still a leaderboard or like a progress bar. So it's something that you see in all the applications nowadays, in all the platforms. You can use those that are, I like to call them classical game elements because they are kind of the thing that you can use in all types of contexts and it will still work. So always think about like what kind of classical game elements you want to see there and just avoid it based on your target audience. So if you can, for example, Julia, if you can tell me more about who are those people in your target audience, then maybe I can recommend much more specific targeted game elements. But if it's just in general people who are not comfortable with saying these game elements because they think that they are childish or it's just not like, for that context, it's better to stick with the classical game elements like leaderboards, progress bars, these kind of things.
Using sort of recognizable aspects to
Yes,
it.
exactly.
Oh, let's jump to the next question from Candelario. What gamification elements would you say make the application more enjoyable, and which ones are the most successful to keep the user engaged?
Yes, well, very interesting question. Actually, like now that we're talking about this, there have been a lot of research done mainly about badges, avatars, I'm like just thinking leaderboards, and they were proven that they were the most successful in like some contexts, but not in the other one. So just like for Julia, where I said, you need to be very specific. It's also like, kind of the secret recipe or the secret tip of building a successful gameful experience. Because if you don't know your target audience, if you're just talking widely or like in a generic way, there are thousands of game elements that you can use, but then maybe not all of them are appealing to your target audience. So first, know your audience, know the context, know the final outcome, and based on that, you can decide on the gamification elements. But again, you have the avatars, the badges, leaderboards, all of the classical ones. They are kind of like what we call it in French passe-partout. So we can just use that like in all kinds of applications and contexts.
Cool, thanks. Victoria sort of asked two questions overall. I'll bring up the second one and sort of incorporate the first one. So her first question was, isn't the lack of rules a rule in itself? And sort of bringing that on further is like, what is your opinion on the seeming or actual lack of rules? And could that be the actual engagement element?
Thank you, Victoria, for your question. So I totally agree with like, where you're going, right now, because when I mentioned in the start, like when we are talking about designing, let's say a gamified environment, we all know that there are rules behind it. I mean, like when I talk about the lack of rules, it's just an illusion that you give to the user so that the user would feel more like, oh, I have this freedom of choice. I know that I can make like this or that. But then the people who are behind the system, all of the designers, all of the teams, marketing teams, commercial teams that are working on that, they know that there are rules and that you are still guiding that person in a way or the other. So to answer the first part of your question, yes, the lack of rules is still a rule because the rules are still there. I don't know if it makes sense or not. But then again, it's like that illusion that you are creating that there are no more rules is what creates that engagement. It's what keeps the engagement going because people, as human beings in general, they don't like to be told what to do. So they just be like, oh, well, if you tell me that I need to do this and stick to this schedule, I'm just not going to be doing it. And even if we don't go to that, like, extent, sometimes you just have other things and you cannot stick to that schedule. So reframing and rescheduling is also very important.
Sort of that, what we sort of just discussed with the voluntariness and the railroading kind of thing. Like you're not creating the box is there, but they can't see the box. Exactly. And so the environmental aspects of it are helping them to make the decision that will hopefully shape the correct behavior for them.
Yeah, I totally agree, Albert. It's like, you're thinking there are no rules, but we all know that there are rules over there.
Yeah, always rules, yeah. Well, let's see if any more come through. I have a few more points that, if it's okay to ask you some more. I also like the sort of the point of where you were discussing, the customizable contexts and how that's sort of, making sure that everybody can join into the thing that they want to join and they feel good for it. And I wanted to link that into with the self-determination theory of relatedness and the sense of belonging in a community. So what are your thoughts in terms of, like, if you, with the exercise app, and if you were to do exercises and go out and have the community, obviously not everybody wants to join in. So is there this concept of like opting in and out and still having that sort of engaging feeling, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. So I mean, that sense of relatedness is very important, as you just mentioned, Albert. But again, like, this just goes back to the question of the freedom of, like, whether you want to join that community or not. So in general, my experience within the, like, let's say physical activity context or the fitness world is that the most successful gamified branded applications, they were the ones that created these communities within the application. Because people, when they are taking up a new sport, they want to have this sense of belonging to a community. So they don't want to be by themselves. But again, they don't want to be pressured. They don't want to feel that like you are pushing them to do things. So it's like, you are still part of the community. You still see all the challenges that are set. And then you can just sign up or subscribe to that challenge, or you can just like ignore it and move on. So it's all of these elements of like creating this sense of belonging to a community, but at the same time, having the choice of whether you want to take part in all the activities or not, what gives that balance to like a successful gameful experience. And actually, I still remember that I had a talk with one person who was on the Nike Run application team. They were developing it, and what they were looking into after they launched the application is not the game elements anymore, it's the sense of membership. So for them, it was really important to be pushing the people towards becoming like, kind of like being proud of saying, oh, I'm a member of the Nike Run Club. And for that, they use different strategies. So for example, you have this exclusive access to these events, to these like limited, let's say, collections. You are the first one that can access it because you are part of the community before the public. And that's what pushed the people to actually be part of that community and feel proud about it. I hope that I answered your question with this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I have a little bit more time. I'll just wanted to sort of one last thing that sort of popped up, and where you brought with one of your last slides in terms of like how those various surveys and all of that, and sort of mentioned that a lot of those were done for like a first-person shooter or something. And I was sort of interested in the idea of like, obviously these questions are then used within the game industry, I suppose. Is there any sort of like method or process in terms of like those questionnaires and surveys that are specifically developed for what you term as the gameful experience and how to better understand what that delivers?
So if I understood your question right, Albert, you want to know whether like from among those scales, there is one that is specifically for the gameful experience.
Yeah.
Yes. So my experience with those scales, I would say the gameful experience one, because it kind of covered the limitations and the gaps from the three previous ones that we saw. And then it's also taken into consideration the emotional aspect. So it was released by Ipman and Al in 2018. It's still new, it's still out there. Like now research is getting built up on that scale. But the main reason is because it's covering all of the aspects. We also have one negative one, that it's the absence of negative effect. So normally you're gonna always reverse the results that you're gonna get when you're having like, the answer from the sample to the survey. And it's very important because then you see that it's not only positive qualities, it's also the negative ones that are present there. So that would definitely be the Gamex one. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's always a few of the sort of questionnaire surveys things. It's always the terms of like especially within gamification, we always come across sort of the emotional aspects, and it seems to always focus on all the positive ones of what we want to try and increase, but very few I've seen where it's like what's causing anger or sadness or anything like that, and how to manage those things. So yeah.
Which is actually like very important for brands to like also recognize that like users, they may have negative feelings towards the application, and they need to just come up with solutions for that. Yeah.
How do you deal with those kind of aspects?
Exactly.
Those are my questions. I think everybody has also asked their questions in the chat as far as I can see. And Victoria has thanked you as well for don't tell me what to do. There are rules in real life as well. So with that, thank you very much, Selma, for delivering your piece and discussing gameful experience with us.